This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. We are in another COVID-19 remote edition of the podcast, talking remotely with the Tim and Connor of Cellarmaker Brewing in San Francisco, California. Welcome to the podcast, Connor and Tim.
Thanks for having us.
How's it going?
In the new issue of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, the IPA issue, which should be out by the time that this podcast airs. In fact, it will be shipping the week that this podcast airs and arriving in people's subscribers' homes, etc. We've got a fantastic article that Connor penned on brewing Hazy West Coast IPA, along with a recipe that he shared with us. And so that spurred my thought that we should also have a conversation here on the podcast about the same. Talk to Cellarmaker about what they specialize in, everything from a fantastic language around hops selection to their approach to dry and crisp but still juicy and fruity IPAs, both of the West Coast persuasion, hazy and not hazy. Looking forward to talking about this because, to be honest, we've watched this kind of resurgence of West Coast IPA coming in force now this year in particular, and pursuing this issue of the this year's IPA issue is very kind of pointed to see how IPA, even from the West Coast variety, has continued to change, respond to some techniques, approaches, flavors, etc. Pioneered even in other styles of IPA, but kind of bringing it into the fold and rethinking what it can be while still maintaining that kind of dry, crisp, and fun West Coast approach that we love. Anyway, we're going to dig into that. Before we do that, nearly 2,000 breweries across the U.S., Canada, and Mexico partner with G&D Chillers. Innovative modular designs and no proprietary parts propel G&D ahead as the premier choice for your glycol chilling needs. Breweries you recognize like Russian River and Ninkasi, Jack's Abbey, Samuel Adams, and more. Trust G&D to chill the beer you love. Call G&D Chillers to discuss your project today or reach out directly at gdchillers.com. Also, brewers seeking amplifying malt and distillers hunting down delicious base options welcome Gambrinus Rye Malt as their malt choice. This rye malt gives spicy, grainy, and bready notes with suggestions of vanilla and sweet dough. It strengthens mouthfeel, viscosity, and head retention combined with flaked oats or wheat for IPAs and is a solid base for a wide range of distilled spirits. Learn more about Gambrinus Rye Malt at bsgcraftbrewing.com or contact BSG at 1-800-374-2739. So Connor and Tim, talk to me a little bit about how you all got into this world of brewing, how you decided to kind of pursue this as a career, and then, of course, launch Cellarmaker Brewery in San Francisco.
Well, Tim and I met each other in 2010 or 2011.
About that.
I was working at Marin Brewing Company in the front of house, and Tim was brewing beer. And kind of two different worlds in a lot of ways. One person's facing the public and the other person's cranking out the good stuff in the back. And we started talking after I'd probably worked there over a year before we really even had a conversation. It's really two different worlds. And started talking about, I want to open a brewery. And a lot of people wanted to open a brewery at that time, and they still do. And we really aligned on so many of the same kind of ideals and the direction we wanted to take it. And kind of as is mentioned in the article, we were kind of looking at what was happening on the East Coast. And I feel like a lot of people on the West Coast were kind of like, we've been doing this longer, we've got our ways, and we're going to keep cranking what we're doing, which is totally cool. And I love those beers and whatnot. But we kind of wanted to take some influence and almost like hybridize the new energy with the, we like to call it like 1 foot in the past, 1 foot in the future, paying homage to what was there before us, but also, being open-minded.
Working in the back of Marin was like my first real brewing experience. It was where I cut my teeth, where I learned, how to pull yeast and how to dry hop tanks. And I spent a good amount of time there. And this was kind of before people were discussing beer heavily on the internet. And you can find a lot of inspiration by searching the web and going into these forums and connecting with people. So I was kind of like in my own world doing this thing and loving it and learning a lot. But I feel like after about 4 years at Marin, I was starting to lose a little bit of steam until I went on a trip to the East Coast, back home. I'm from the East Coast, but back there, and really started exploring some of the breweries out there and seeing what they were doing differently out there that the West Coast was doing. And exploring flavor profiles like they do, and especially in hoppy beers, where the body was bigger, flavors were juicier, the bitterness was lower. That was really eye-catching. And I got really re-inspired by seeing what they were doing out there and going to Hill Farmstead and seeing what Sean was doing. So when I came back and Connor and I started talking, like he said, we were kind of like both amazed by that movement and ready to take it to the West Coast.
I was a little bit of a nerd, so I was trading beer. And, I brought up Hill Farmstead, which in 2011 in California wasn't exactly a household name, and I was kind of like, there's this brewery in Vermont, and their IPAs are so aromatic, but they're so fruity, and they're not bitter, but they're not ripping bitter like the West Coast IPAs. And then Tim was like, yeah, I was just out there like 2 weeks ago, dude, and I know exactly what you're talking about. So
those were still early days. They were a year old at that point, or maybe a year and a half in 2011.
Totally.
So it's one thing to have this idea about what you want to make, and it's another thing to say, hey, let's go start an entire business about it and do it in a pretty expensive market like San Francisco and go high risk. Talk to me about some of the steps between that idea of let's go create this and how then you were able to kind of make the business become a reality.
I guess when Tim and I had started talking, I was kind of already in a business plan was written. Money had just started to get raised. And I was kind of jumping all in regardless. I was like, I'm going to find a brewer. I'm going to run the business side of this. I had worked at City Beer Store for a couple of years as well. And that was a really cool experience for me to really just, it was just like a constant data set, when I started working there, I was kind of like, I was thinking, there's so much IPA, the world doesn't need more IPA. Maybe I'll do these like, fruit beers and herbal beers and forage, this and that. And then I just watched those 2 or 3 IPA fridges just get pillaged all day long. And I'm like, we were getting beer shipped from distributors in SoCal and San Diego and shit where they'd be 8 months old, 12 months old. And I'm like, why are we selling this garbage? And it's how the system was. You had to demand more of it. The only brewery that was really, had this freshness thing going was Russian River. And it was just sheerly because of demand. You get the delivery on Wednesday, it's sold out by Friday. Some weeks it's sold out by Thursday. 8 cases, boom, and it's fresh. And I think a lot of people weren't necessarily connecting the simple dots of, so I really like this Pliny beer, but it doesn't hurt that it's also 3 days old and I'm drinking it. I don't know how aware that many people were. So that kind of really set something off in my brain of like, hey, if we just get really, really crazy about freshness, people aren't necessarily going to understand why they like the beer so much, but it certainly helps that the aroma rips. And why would we serve anything that's over 2 or 3 weeks old? There's just get another beer behind it,
I have to hand it to Connor. He was dead set on having a brewery in the neighborhood we're in, or at least around it. He knew that people, if we followed this model of freshness and highly hopped, and working at City Beer Store, which is not far from here, he knew people would come out here. Either they're working here or they're living somewhere else in the city, but they would make the journey to what's kind of like not the greatest neighborhood in the world to drink, world-class beer.
In a garage.
Yeah. And, and it is expensive. It's not the biggest spot in the world. I wish I had 3-4 times the space, especially these days. But it is what it is, and it's been beautiful for us. So we're not complaining.
We're happy to be here.
And so the idea of freshness, the idea of being able to deliver beer hot off the presses, if you will, was kind of a core formative idea for this then, that it wasn't to make as much as you can. It was to make just as much as you need to sell, and then time frame to make sure that people can experience it the way you want them to experience it.
Yeah, I mean, we started with 4 10-barrel fermenters. So at the time, as a brewery that has no reputation and nobody knows, they just kind of go, oh, it's, the person from this place and then a person from this place. That seemed like a lot of beer at the time. I'm looking at it going, this is 1,200 gallons of beer. Like, is this too much beer? Who knows?
We talked a lot about, should we do a 7-barrel system or a 10-barrel system,
And I wish it was a 20, or a 30. So, you live, you learn. You can go way too big, and we've all seen plenty of breweries that go too big, breweries that go too small. I don't really have any regrets because really the 10-barrel size has allowed us. There's been a lot of stuff over the years, like the HBC varieties, and when we got a crack at Equinox before, all these varieties before they existed. They're not giving you a pallet of that stuff. You're getting 22, 33, 44 pounds. We're right at that size where you can make a real batch of beer with it, but it's also, you don't need that much of the raw ingredients. So no regrets on the 10. The beer moves fresh. I definitely know that the breweries that have 30s and 40s are kind of like, oh, our batch of IPA is on tap for about a month. And we always just target about 16 days. So, and it's always give or take depending on customer reaction and, just how busy things are in the tap room.
Sure. These are always like those hindsight questions where, and I love it when folks that are trying to get into the world of brewing spend that same amount of time trying to figure out this question 5 or 7 or 10 or 15. And of course the logic is always driven by the successful brewers that people talk to when they're asking it for advice. And that advice will typically be, get a bigger one, go bigger, because you're just going to upgrade later. And you never really talk to the folks that are going the other direction and, are hamstrung by a system that's a little too large for that, just because they're in a different position. So, history gets written by the winners. And so that advice tends to kind of fall in one direction. But you're right. I think there is, if there's one commonality among brewers I talk to, it's that even though it's completely inefficient to start smaller, there is something that's learned through that process of brewing often, and being able to learn and grow by brewing all the time is something that helps you as a professional get to and build that kind of skill and that flexibility and that understanding of your ingredients later on. Speaking of ingredients, I want to start talking about hops because, of course, that's now what you all are so well known for. But before we do that, with nearly 20 years of innovation and experience, Brewmation specializes in electric, steam, and direct fire brew houses, complete cellar solutions, and automated controls for the craft brewing industry. From half-barrel to 30-barrel systems, Brewmation puts you in control to design a brewery that fits your needs and brewing style. Whether you're starting a new brewery, upgrading your cellar, or just need some parts to keep you up and running, Brewmation has you covered. Visit them at brewmation.com to get started. Also, born out of a basement in Milwaukee a decade ago, Spike has grown to become a leading manufacturer of premium quality brewing equipment. So if you're looking for a reliable system for home or a commercial-grade nano for your brewery, this is the time to buy. Spike is offering Craft Beer and Brewing listeners a special 10% off all 3-vessel system purchases while supplies last. Visit spikebrewing.com/craft and enter the code CBB at checkout. Spike Brewing, pursue what's possible. So you said before that hops and IPAs were not necessarily initially the focus in the formative phase of the brewery, but certainly it's become what I think most consumers, fellow brewers, and others know you for and respect you for. As you got started, hops were also in a kind of formative stage, and over the last decade, we've watched incredible changes within the world of hops. Talk to me a little bit about how, as you were getting into this brewing world in a professional capacity, that you built your understanding of how hops work in the brew house and developed a means of evaluating hops, so that you can then conceive of and build from them.
We started off. I didn't have a lot of experience personally. at Marin, it was opening up a bag of hops that the company, whoever you bought it from, sent to you. We didn't do any type of selection. So I knew what good hops kind of smelled like, and I kind of knew what bad hops smelled like. But there was no more thought that was put into it because we didn't have the financial means. We didn't have the connections to do that. And, there's a lot of other stuff going on at Marin that, that needs to be focused on. So we didn't have the time to really do it.
And that was generally normal in that world of brewing at the time. There were some brewers that were hyper-focused on this, but they were a vast minority at the time. Some brewers that would build some direct relationships with hops growers, but you can count them on two hands, I think, back at that time.
It was generally pretty regional, so the closer you were to the source, to Yakima, Pacific Northwest brewers were just kind of like, I think it made more sense because they're like, it's only 3 hours. I might as well go check it out and see what I can find. And then, of course, you've got the big breweries like Sierra Nevada, and I'm sure Bell's was selecting Centennial before hop selection was a term amongst smaller brewers.
Right.
But yeah, I remember, I think we kind of got lucky. We were buying a lot of New Zealand hops and a lot of Australian hops. So initially those are all pretty good, smaller farms, smaller amounts. But ultimately, I remember it was probably 5 months in or something. We had a very simple but tasty West Coast IPA called Hop Killa that was like a Simcoe Citra thing. And it was so good, batch one, that we made it again 2 months later. And I remember it just being like really kind of musty, like kind of had almost an oxidative quality, like kind of a stanky basement kind of thing. And I remember saying like, hey, Tim, like, what do you think's up with this? And he's like, the Simcoe's weird. So we go smell the Simcoe, and now looking back on it, it's all common sense, but it was almost kind of like we figured it out a little bit just from, trying to pay attention to identifying the problem or the weak link in the beer. And then we were like, well, this Simcoe sucks. And then simultaneously, Row 2 Hill 56 had been a brand of Russian Rivers for a couple years. And you read this romantic story about Vinny and Jason Perald, and, you drink Row 2 and you're like, this Simcoe crushes it every time. How do I get that Simcoe? So, we started emailing our Yakima chief rep, and basically, initially, the first thing we did with them before we ever did selection, I just said, I want Jason Peralt hops across the board. And they were super kind of, I don't know how stoked they were initially, because this tiny little brewery without very much buying power is kind of swinging around saying, hey, you got to take care of me, and I want the good stuff. And the first selection we ever did was all they gave us was 5 lots on paper with just the stats of the different oils. And we were talking to our buddy Nate at the Brewing Network, Nathan Smith, and a couple other people, like, can you turn this into anything? Some of these are better than others, but really, like, you just got to smell it.
There was no roadmap. We really, I think, developed our own path on how to figure out, every year how to get a little bit better, how to get better hops. Started really paying attention to lot numbers. And if we came across something that we really liked, hey, can we just get, subscribe to that lot number? And sometimes they say yes, sometimes they say no.
Usually they say no, and then we would I'd be like, well, fine, here's my credit card number, give me a pallet of that Simcoe.
And we would.
And on a cash flow front, that sucked, but we were also like, every Simcoe beer for the next 4 months is going to kick ass.
But it was so much better using that one awesome lot than getting random stuff in the mail that sometimes was even better, but most of the time was not. And I remember talking to brewers about this some years ago, and I think I don't know if we pioneered that idea of just buying a ton of a hop that we really like, but definitely some jaws hit the ground, or like, wow, I never even thought of that. But you just, like I said, you got to do what you got to do. I think once you pester people enough, unfortunately, they start to pay attention a little bit more and realize, well, these guys, they really do care. They're annoying, but they care. And that's big points with them.
Every hops company is going to hate us after this. Oh, yeah, the solution is just pestering your hops vendor.
Well, there's more transparency, though, that's happened in the last 5-6 years. And even smaller breweries are able to go up and do a group selection. And depending on the vendors that you work with, like Hollingbury and Son, smaller hop supplier. They were the first people that brought us in and allowed us to do selection. And they were like, I don't care that you're only spending, whatever, 10 or 15 grand with us a year. You came all the way up here, so here's the table and here's 10 centennials and check it out. And I mean, that moment right there, I think for Tim and I, is where you smell the worst 3 and you're like, I sure as hell don't want these. I'm okay with the middle. And then there's 1 or 2 that are just totally rewriting the book on everything you knew about that variety. And you're like, this Centennial's got big pineapple. Like, I don't get that in the stuff we randomly buy. So again, I want this all the time. Like, let's if we get every single variety we get is top notch, top 10% across the board. I think it's pretty obvious that the beers are going to taste better.
Now, that raises an interesting question for me. And there's this idea of quality, but quality runs a wide gamut based on what you are actually looking for in that kind of flavor. And so, for you, there are some things. If you're looking for, a pineapple character in a hop and you instead get diesel and dank, then clearly that's just not what you're looking for. But then at the same time, sometimes there are smaller amounts of those other characters that can, provide interesting layers of complexity to a beer. And then, of course, if you're Bell's, you're not necessarily looking for that most awesome fruity Centennial. You're looking for a very consistent Centennial that tastes the way that people expect it to taste within the scope of your beer. So, talk to me a little bit about that challenge between kind of consistency of expectation in a hop versus celebrating these kinds of outlier things that you may come across here or there and then stock up on, but then also not be able to replicate necessarily in the next crop year or the crop year after that. Also, we can kind of work from there and talk about how, that year-to-year variation and how that impacts the way that, you guys then build, revise, and change recipes.
So I would say the beauty of not really having brands, especially at that formative point of our company, we didn't really care about a hop being to type. If I remember, we've bought Mosaic that's like super limey before. That has nothing to do with Mosaic, but it was an awesome hop, whatever it was. And that it's only going to be around for 2 or 3 months, but you embrace it and then you move on. So it's kind of like celebrating the fact that this is an agricultural product. There is going to be variance year to year. We don't have a brand where people have an expectation of a flavor. And we also don't mind, even within the quasi brands. And by that, I mean, at that time for us, it was draft only beers that got brewed more than, I don't know, three times a year would be kind of a brand. I don't think we really minded that they would kind of sway differently depending on what lots we had, what hops.
I think we do have expectations to a certain degree, though, where there is an ideal Mosaic maybe for us, and I think Connor and I could agree on what that might have. But we are always open to being wowed by something new and different. And yeah, if you get that ideal Mosaic on the table and then you get that really different but awesome Mosaic, then we're going to try to talk our ways into getting both of them.
And furthermore, something that we've been doing since I think our first or second year was when we would have all these lots and some of these would be off type and then one is that classic Mosaic, we would say, hey, when we make a single hop beer, it's a little boring with one lot. Even if it's a really banging lot, we have this limey Mosaic. We've got that classic kind of blueberry resin pine tree Mosaic. And then this one's got this cool dried apricot character. Well, let's layer them in 50, 25, 25 with the classic leading the charge. And this beer is going to be layered because it does have different lots in it. It doesn't have multiple varieties, but I think it tells a better story. And we kind of almost, we're very close to Sonoma, Napa, the whole wine world up here. And a lot of the best wines up there, they're not getting a single Pinot Noir. Like if they want to make really good stuff, generally, I mean, those are really good and they're expensive and they're nice. But kind of the bigger spots are blending multiple to really round out and tell the story of that variety. The variety name is just that. It's just a name, right?
At any point we have, of the main hops that people use these days, we deal with 2 upwards of 5 lots of each. And we really, there's usually a superstar and then maybe 2 superstars if we're lucky. and then maybe one or two other lots that are really nice and pleasant. So we'll let the superstars kind of take the lead. They make up 60, 70, 80% of the beer, and then we'll sprinkle in the other 10 to 40% with the other lots just to add a little more variation.
It's such an interesting idea here, and one of the things I love is that these different modes of brewing. That brewing doesn't have to be one thing. It is not. It can be about consistent brands and consumer expectation, produced on a consistently large scale. It can also be something that is, like a chef-driven restaurant where the menu is determined each night based on the freshest fish at the fish market or the vegetables that are in season at that point, and who's growing what and what they have access to in that given week. In a lot of ways, you are operating more like chefs in that sense of reacting to what you have and building the beers that you want to make because of the things that are available to you and that are inspiring you, rather than this consumer expectation about producing some consistent thing that people always want. And both of those modes are valid. Neither are wrong. They're just different modes, and we can accept and embrace both of those. But speaking of this kind of blending hops of the same variety in different lots, in our IPA issue, you all sent us some Wild Gooseberry Chase, which had 5 lots of Nelson in it. Walk me through how you come up, like how would you define a superstar version of that versus your kind of bit players, and how do you articulate in some sort of language that you can both commonly understand, what these definitions are? Well,
I mean, part of working with freestyle farms in New Zealand, it's kind of like having a relationship with a butcher. You certainly are able to select hops with them, but generally you're going to get some of the other lots that maybe weren't your first or second choice. And that doesn't bother me because Tim and I have been surprised multiple years where a lot we didn't love on the table actually ends up being great. And something we've learned with Nelson, and with Nelson specifically, but other varieties as well, is that a little bit of overripeness on the selection table, there might be a lot that is a little more pleasant smelling and just fruit and floral, and none of that dank even leading into overripe. Something we like to call grit sometimes. The grit translates into a better, punchier beer, and you sacrifice getting a little bit of dank in there, but it punches so much harder in the beer. So lately we try to find if our comfort zone is like a 5, on a 1 to 10 is a 5, we try and hit that like 6.5 with a little more grit than we're comfortable with, and don't act like we're selecting something at the dispensary per se for ourselves, but actually like we're trying to get something that's a little bit more over the edge, so to speak.
We're still learning a lot about, selecting hops, what you pick on the table, what you actually get when you open that bag. And so for our single hop beers, like Gooseberry Chase, Connor mentioned, like there's going to be some expectations and things you didn't expect, and you kind of run with it. And, for designing these beers, you're going to have that favorite lot. And I mean, I think, again, it goes back to having that kind of what is your ideal version of that hop and using that as the base for the beer. And then it all depends on what that hop brings. So our favorite lot of Nelson right now is pretty fruity. It's got some nice white wine character. It's got some kind of like grape stem edges to it. And so we kind of want to have that and then sprinkle in a little more spice or dankness around that. We don't want like a complete fruit-forward experience all the time. We want an experience that comes off fruity, but also travels in different directions in your nose, on your palate. We don't want to be one note. We want to have some real depth to it.
it has, and I think that's a poignant point to make right now, and one that we discovered really going back, because, we watch the march of time basically through our consistent issues year to year. Every year we're going to do a lager issue. Every year it's an IPA issue. Every year there's a stout issue. And so, for us in a year over year kind of watching time move, you can look back to the previous year and see what things looked like, and then look to what we're doing now and what breweries are sending and what we're tasting. It was a fascinating process through this IPA issue, realizing that there are so many different expressions beyond juice bomb, beyond citrus, in this kind of like, let's just make pure juice approach to hazy and sweet IPAs. And it was fascinating to, for me to see that within context, these things didn't compete with themselves. That in a flight of hazy IPAs, you could have dry expressions, you could have sweeter expressions, and it was not a certainty that the sweeter beers would score higher or present themselves in a more intense way. That some of those drier beers, funkier beers, weirder, interesting beers actually stood out more in that kind of judging context, because there was character to them, because they had those layers of depth, and because they felt, overall though, it was remarkable how sophisticated IPA feels right now compared to how it is generally perceived. That, most people, if you were asking, IPA, well, it's either too bitter or it's too sweet, because I think we have these mental caricatures of the style, built around these kind of, dueling East Coast or West Coast ideals. But the reality of IPA today is much more complex and interesting than that. Even from within your own brewery, how do you all think about building that range of different experiences for people that enjoy your beer? And then also find some common thread through it, so that people who might enjoy these different expressions also still feel like it's a Cellarmaker beer.
Well, I think Connor and I had a discussion a couple of years ago when, what you're saying was really reigning true, and there was this East versus West divide. And those East Coast beers, not all of them, of course, but were really yeast-driven, really going for this like over-the-top fruit profile.
Full body, and we liked drinking those beers, but we decided that, when I wake up in the morning, I can have a glass of OJ, but I'm not going to drink 4 glasses of OJ. I want to be able to go from beer to beer, glass to glass, and drink the same thing and really understand it, but never be turned off by any of the elements. And so we were talking, and we're like, you know what? We do this thing with the Chico yeast. It's clean. It really lets the hops express themselves. It doesn't get in the way. It doesn't present like this kind of artificial sweetness that turns us off. Let's really let's drive this one home. Like, this is us. This is Cellarmaker. Like, let's double down on it and let's explore it to its fullest. And it's I don't know. We've just I can drink a lot of West Coast IPA. I can drink a lot of hazy West Coast IPA, but I can't drink that much, typical, if you will, East Coast IPA. And I know that's just a very general way of describing it, but I think you guys know what I mean.
Sure. So let's talk a little bit about what you mean when you say hazy West Coast IPA. But before we do that, Abe Beverage Equipment provides complete brewing and packaging solutions worldwide. Whether you're just starting out or looking to expand, Abe offers brew houses, tanks, canning lines, and more for small to medium-sized brewers. Abe has equipped over 1,000 breweries worldwide and has the best customer service in the industry. Call Abe Beverage Equipment at 402-475-BEER or visit abeequipment.com to learn more. That's abeequipment.com for complete brewing and packaging solutions. So Connor, obviously, when we talk about hazy West Coast IPA, there is a story that you've written, a brew's perspective, along with a recipe in the new issue of Craft Beer and Brewing magazine, and in an act of shameless self-promotion, I certainly encourage everyone to go out, if you're not already a subscriber, and pick up a copy of the magazine. But walk me through a little bit in your own words and your own language about how you all envision this idea of hazy West Coast IPA and what that means in terms of, brewing specs, mash, yeast, hops, etc.
Well, conceptually, I would say it's sort of something that we stumbled on. High dry hopping rates, the yeast that was readily available that we could get a free pitch from neighboring friendly breweries. Thank you, Drake's. And really, a lot of the Southern Hemisphere hops would leave a haze in there too. We noticed a correlation with that, something with processing that we still haven't totally wrapped our heads around. But, these beers were staying hazy, and you kind of look around at all the other iterations of IPA that exist, and it's kind of like, why do we have to have West Coast and then Northeast, and then let's just go straight to milk sugar, and brewed IPA and like, why couldn't we play within that comfort zone? And to me, the hazy West Coast falls kind of right in between the two, the West Coast and the NE IPA. So, I mean, we were just making them for a while there, and it's just kind of the beer that came out of our system, and we were really happy with it. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, I don't know, it's almost like people just started with these far-fetched ideas for IPA before they'd really tinkered in what was already a really happy place, and in between those two styles of West Coast and East Coast.
Yeah, and it comes off a little bit drier than something that finishes at maybe 4 or 5 Plato, 6 Plato. We try to shoot for somewhere in that, like, 2, maybe as much as 3.25 Plato finishing gravity. There's a fair amount of bitterness. It's not like it lacks bitterness, but there's some there, which, again, like, keeps the beer interesting and allows you to drink a good amount of it because your palate doesn't get fatigued with sweetness. And it's really aroma driven with, I think it's tough to brew these beers at home to a certain degree unless you can get really good quality hops, because that's what's driving the ship. And our beer can still get even better because that is a lifelong pursuit.
With with this style, and especially with a lot of these aromatic hops, that differing levels of residual sweetness certainly affect how those hops present in a beer and can bring out different kinds of characters. And we've seen the exact same thing, like level of alcohol also has some impact again on how hops express, and hops in a 5% beer may come across considerably differently than they do in an 8% beer, and that may be directly driven to the amount of sweetness that's still allowed in a beer, to balance out that kind of higher alcohol level. Talk to me a little bit about how, especially in pale ales, that you find ways to heighten those aromatic characters of hops, despite having not just the aromatic character, but also the kind of round flavor in those hops, so that they don't get completely flattened in smaller beers.
Our approach is, a pale ale I approach like a session IPA. It's going to have a little bit more residual sugar, so it doesn't come off anemic. It's going to be really well dry hopped to, again, drive the aroma. And so I think of pale ale more as like this more drinkable IPA. And Connor and I are big proponents of pale ale. It gives us everything we want that an IPA has, but with less alcohol, so we can drink a little bit more of it, or stop at 2 and feel perfectly well.
Yeah, I think the session IPA thing that happened in, like 2011, it's kind of like we already had that. It's called pale ale. You're just not hopping it well enough. and now, because you want session IPA to be different from pale ale, you're just going to blow on a downward past the pale ale ABV and give me this 4.2 thing. Like that, I don't know. To me, you need a little more body in a hoppy beer. So all of our pale ales are generally in that mid-5s range. And if you see me in the tap room, I'm drinking pale ale 90% of the time. Like Tim said, it gives me everything I want out of a hoppy beer. Our pale ales are usually dry hopped at about 2.5 pounds per barrel. So the aroma rips.
Wow.
There's less alcohol flavor going on. It's just super thin in a good way. It's crispy. It's not lager crispy, but it's got all the things I want in IPA with 5.7 instead of 7%. And I've definitely had streaks here where I'm drinking so much pale ale that like a 7% IPA tastes like a huge beer to me all of a sudden because I'm just on the pale ale train. So. Yeah, pale ale life.
It is an interesting trend to see this kind of 4.2, 3.7 IPA thing come along, and I completely agree with you that first generation of session IPA were really horrible beers, thin and ragged bitterness, and with no body to kind of back up this intensely sharp and jagged kind of cutting hop character. And we've learned so much since then, and a couple weeks ago, I talked to Bells about brewing Lighthearted, same kind of thing, like sub 4% IPA. It is fascinating to see how even the techniques to brew these beers have a real commonality with, this kind of brewing inspired through the New England IPA kind of tradition. Well, I shouldn't call it tradition, this New England IPA experience where thinking about the quality of the bitterness and the techniques necessary to produce a different feel of bitterness becomes a key component in that beer. Talk to me a little bit about how you all use strategies to make sure that bitterness is firm, but also rounded and not an unpleasant bitterness, whether that's Whirlpool or late hop side additions, or even using cold side additions of hops to add bitterness into the beer, even though, shouldn't theoretically be possible.
We are exploring bitterness more now than we've ever explored it before. When we started, I think we all ran screaming away from bitterness like a house on fire. We were just so used to drinking tongue-scraping West Coast IPA that once you try the stuff that was kind of softer, lighter, maybe sweeter coming out of the East, you're like, wow, I really want to see how far down that road I can go. Our beers at first, there was no hops in the boil whatsoever. It was all Whirlpool. We wanted to get all the aroma we could and, this kind of pure flavor, hop expression flavor. So it's big Whirlpool, big dry hop. And, over time you start to kind of realize that your beer is a little lifeless when you do that. So we started kind of just gradually increasing some hopping, 15 minutes from the end, I think we started. Then let's try maybe 30 minutes from the end. Oh, here's the 60. And kind of where we are now is all over the place, depending on the style.
Yeah.
West Coast IPA, I think we're making the best West Coast IPA we've ever made. And it is, on paper, the most bitter beer coming out of here. Like at times 2, times 3. It's my West Coast IPA are more bitter on paper than my double IPAs were 2-3 years ago.
Interesting.
But they don't come off that way. They come off as structured. They come off as a story of flavor from the beginning of the sip to a minute after. Because if you can find the right type of bitterness, and that really depends on total bitterness and the hop selection, you can really create a beer that just like I don't know. It is a great story from beginning to end. And learning more about, I would say that was really influenced in learning how to create balanced, bitter, crisp lager, and that kind of extended into West Coast IPA from there. Because you're using these low alpha hops in lager, really kind of exploring how much hop matter you could put into a kettle without overwhelming this very slim beer. And that gets you thinking more about, here's a little bit of a bigger beer, West Coast IPA, what can I do with that? And now we're taking what we've learned from that and putting it into the more hazy stuff, trying to, again, achieve a nice balance between sweetness and bitterness, but also how much hop matter can we fit in there without throwing off that bitterness or getting astringent or whatnot.
So if I'm reading between the lines, are you in your hoppier, kind of IPA style beers using differing varieties for bitterness in order, to achieve different kinds of character to that? Versus just using high alpha, efficient kind of bittering hops. Is there some magic to the kind of varieties that you're bittering with, or are you using them in dual kind of purposes for both aroma and bittering, and using more common varieties?
I mean, we're tried and tested on Simcoe as a bittering hop. We've always used Simcoe. I love the flavor of it. It's clean. It adds, a perfect amount of American hop flavor. I honestly am still exploring this whole thing a lot. I'll throw Strata in the middle of the boil. I'll throw Citra. I'll try Galaxy. I've tried them all, and it's not making the same beer all the time over and over as we do. It's hard to kind of pinpoint or pin down exactly what flavor's coming from where. But it's definitely a big. There have been red flags where I'll put something in there and I'll be like, you know what? Nope, that is an obviously bad choice for a mid-boil hop. It gives me way too maybe like old school of flavor, which might be good sometimes, but mostly for us not. Then a lot of these things are pH dependent and alcohol and sugar content dependent. So I don't know. I'm still learning a whole lot about it, and I don't think I could really give you a perfect answer yet.
Either that, or it's so complex and contextual that we don't have enough time to go into all of the finer point details on that. Or have, through your hops experimentation lately over the last few months, has there been anything that you've discovered or learned that was either counterintuitive or created another kind of aha moment, or is just something that caught you off guard?
There is something that I think we've both figured out recently that is just so weird and wonderful at the same time. Of just like, we did selection with Yakima Chief this past year, and we selected this lot of Mosaic that we were really blown away by on the table. It was just like blueberry and cotton candy, some really amazing tropical fruit. And when we got the hops in, we opened up that first bag, and it was just so dark and earthy, and it was almost like the hops had like closed in on themselves, and you couldn't smell any of those aromas that we smelt on the table. And we were really bummed because we have a lot of it. And so but we weren't discouraged. We had other hops, lots of Mosaic from other suppliers that were working for us, and we were still actually working on our 2018 contract, which was tasting better than ever. And that's kind of what happened with this one. After about 4 or 5 months, it suddenly became this whole new hop, so much more resembling what was on that table. And that, for us, was really eye-opening, that, like, this stuff is processed so quickly and so perfectly in a way now that it could change it or it can capture it perfectly, but it's whatever you get is going to change over time.
This is also, I think, the 4th year in a row that this has happened to us with Mosaic, where we select something, we obviously like it enough to select it, and then it gets processed in late November, early December, and we crack open a bag, and it's just disappointment on what is like a $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 purchase,
right.
And that's frustrating. And last year, our rep was just like, "Hey, can you do me a favor? Can you just brew a 10-barrel batch with it, even though you don't like how it smells, and see how it goes?" And it actually performed really well in the beer. It's just the bag appeal, the aroma out of the bag it's very different from what you picked on the table. And you almost wonder if the company made a mistake or something like that. And then you try the finished beer and you go, no, this has the stuff I remember. And then again, the last 2 or 3 years, same thing. Right around April, May, that hop becomes the hop that you thought it was. Specifically, this has happened to Mosaic. There are other varieties that definitely they evolve. And Strata for sure. And it's kind of like, if you want the best hop, the experience changes throughout the year, I guess is what I'm saying. So if a brewery, some breweries are always like way behind on what they're using. Let's say that everyone's onto the new stuff by March, that was harvested in September, processed in December, yada yada. The beer that you drink in March with all those hops that were harvested 6 months ago, you will never experience that exact flavor, even with those same lots of everything, same brewer, same system, blah, blah, blah. If you drink that beer again in September, it is not the same. They are, I don't want to say they're fading, they're evolving. And some varieties might get better, some varieties just get different. The Citra might have the Mandarin fade out, and then there's kind of like a more of a piney, like it's like that moment is fleeting. So enjoy that experience, because the next batch is not going to be exactly the same, especially 4 months later, 6 months later.
Have you done any experimenting with the means in which you store those hops to either accelerate or decelerate that kind of process? Whether, obviously, most hops vendors are going to store them at freezing temperatures. A lot of breweries don't store at freezing temperatures; they store in cold box, refrigeration temperatures. Those can potentially have different impacts on aging of hops over time. Have you played or toyed around with that at all to see if that has any effect on this kind of evolution of the hop itself?
We've definitely heard of breweries that would leave their hops out at room temp to accelerate the aging, which kind of goes against everything we are comfortable with.
Right.
But we did end up doing that, right? I know it happened. I know Alvarado Street's done it with great results.
The time when I started to think about actually doing it was kind of when these hops started to come around. So I didn't need to, but it is definitely something. It is something I want to try, because it makes sense. I mean, if you open up a fresh bag of hops, smell it, and then you come back to it 10, 15 minutes later, there's a good chance it's going to smell different. Good for better or for worse. But there is evolution there, and obviously storing warm is going to change it.
Yeah, it's fascinating how complex this gets, and how so few rules people can actually build for how to understand these. And as soon as we think we understand one portion of it, you realize that we've now just created a whole series of new questions that we can also need to kind of pursue and answer around this. Are there any hops varieties that you find are bigger in this kind of development process, or others that kind of maintain more consistent stability over that time? What are your big changers and what are your big not changers?
Any hop that can really swing in an earthy direction seems to evolve over time. Strata, Mosaic. I really haven't seen it much with like Citra or Simcoe.
We've had Citra get better too.
We've had Citra get better, but I wouldn't say it went from like a darker aroma to a brighter. It was just like the fruit evolved in a different way. But also we select for like pretty fruit forward Citra and try to stay away from any of the kind of darker aromas or onion and garlic.
Right.
Armpit,
yeah. Like I said earlier, we're learning so much about like selection and what we get after selection and how that all changes. I think the past 2 years has been that's been like you said, the biggest aha moments.
Right.
But it's also a total like the more you learn, the less you knew. You realize the less you know. One step forward, 2 steps back, kind of thing.
For sure. Let's talk a little bit about New Zealand hops again. Obviously, this is a big thing for you all. You all have been using New Zealand hops for a really long time and have more experience than a lot of other brewers out there in the world of brewing. Talk to me about varieties. Obviously, we've already talked about Nelson Sauvin, but talk to me about other New Zealand hop varieties, how you think about them, how you describe the flavors in them, and some of your favorites in that realm, what they can kind of contribute in making those flavor contributions to end beers.
I'd say that aside from Tim and I, there's like a simple term we use, but like for hops in general, not just New Zealand, but there are hops that drive the bus, and then there are hops that certainly do not. And aside from Nelson, I want to say all the other New Zealand varieties that we brew with, at least, like Motueka is a really soft, subtle hop. It's really nice and floral and spritzy lime, and we love using it. But we would never put it in an IPA at more than like 30% and expect it to contribute and to punch. Rawaka is a great hop. There's like a lot of like lore around Rawaka because it's so hard to get, and you don't even want to know what we went through to get the smallest amounts of it back in like 2014, and what we paid. But it is a really cool hop. It's a unique flavor. It doesn't on the good old flavor spider graph kind of thing that a lot of hop companies show. Rawaka lands in an area that nothing else gets close to. But at the same time, it's like anywhere from 4.2 to like 6.3 alpha. So it also does not drive. It's a mellow hop. So we use it in blonde ales and pale ales, but we're not making like Rawaka triple IPAs. Like that just kind of seems really expensive to use the amount that would make it really speak, and then that kind of excess of a low alpha hop. I don't know.
Get really grassy.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like a recipe for success.
New Zealand hops for us have always been kind of the white whale of all the hops. Galaxy is just such a conundrum that we don't even really pay much attention to it anymore, other than trying a couple of different lots and hopefully we get something good. But that's like the
what do you mean
Soviet
by that?
Union over there.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, it's kind of like what you were saying earlier about how like chefs will chefs will cook with whatever speaks to them that week at the farmer's market or from their supplier or whatever. You could look at like our hypothetical brew history calendar or whatever, and there are certain like 6 to 10 month swings where we just don't make a damn Galaxy beer because the Galaxy we're getting is plasticky, it's astringent, it's weird, it's overripe, it has no fruit, and it's got this big licorice, ginger, anise character. We have been so hot and cold with Galaxy, and the customer reaction to that word on the label is so exciting. And right now we actually have the best Galaxy we've probably had in, 3 or 4 years. So we're brewing with it, but then once that runs out, it's back to the Galaxy Roulette, as we like to call it. And it definitely it totally sucks to open up a box of hops that costs like $700 and you smell it and you go, and what do you do then? Like, we're not going to sell it to another brewery. So
I don't know what Hop Products Australia is like, and means the end is here, but like they seem pretty closed off to the brewing world. And they kind of do their thing over there. I can't really think of like major craft brewers who work closely with them.
Their transparency is pretty much zero. And brewers like transparency. We're trying to learn, and we're trying to learn together. I mean, Tim's working with Yakima Chief right now on a project that ideally helps everyone make better beer. HPA, like, I don't have an email. I don't have a contact. Apparently the lots get blended. Like all of them, a lot of lots get blended in the USA as well, but all the Galaxies blended. So there could be this beautiful lot that just sings, but they're blending in the ginger and the licorice. And it's super expensive, and then there's all this hype. It's kind of really annoying. If you spend that much money per year on anything else in any other industry, you've got to say, and you get to shake someone's hand eventually. We don't hate it, and we play the game with it, but it's kind of like that's the hop that we're still stuck in 2013 on. That's the hop where we find the good lot, and we're like, hey, so we're gonna buy our entire contract, drop $20,000 right now, and get this lot because it's so good. But we're playing the games that we used to play 6-7 years ago because it's the only way to get good stuff, and even then, it's not always that great. So. It's not, Galaxy's not cool. I mean, when it's good, but
it's an expensive bet to place, huh? So what do you do with this Galaxy that you've now paid an exorbitant amount of money for, and are not in love with? It may not be bad per se, but it's just not, that kind of height of it. Do you start blending that in with some other hops to kind of, just add a small hint of complexity in certain beers, or what's the end game on that?
We've definitely thrown them out right out the gate.
Really?
Tim and I did that. We did that more with Nelson before we worked with Freestyle, and their entire 2016 harvest was just oxidized garbage, and there were 2 or 3 44-pound bags, and it's $14-15 a pound. So, we're talking $600 ish, and it's a full 44. So it's not like you cut a little 11-pound bag. And we would cut those open and just look at each other like, well, this smells like rotting banana bread and onion and diesel fuel, and there's really nothing we can do with this. And it just went straight into the green bin.
I think
that sucks.
We have the luxury of the company's doing all right. I am not a proponent for sprinkling in a pound here, a pound there of hops I don't like into a beer. Like, that's not the beer I want to create. I'm a huge advocate for only using what we love. And, I'm not trying to this isn't a sales pitch. This is like a true belief of mine. I can taste a pound of Columbus in an IPA, so I can taste a pound of Nelson that's shit in an IPA, So, I don't know.
And you can certainly taste a pound of Sabro in any beer.
I definitely steer away from that.
Not a Sabro fan?
We like Sabro. It's just it can take over a beer really quickly.
The best Sabro beer we make is 100% Sabro, and it just doubles down on the weird and really just full cannonball. And I love that beer. And then any other beer that has more than like 5% Sabro kind of doesn't really get me so excited. I don't know. Coconut's not what I'm looking for in IPA. I want it to taste like tropical fruit and pine trees. So,
are there any other American varieties of hops that especially as hops growers and hops companies are pulling together new and experimental things that you found really exciting or offer a kind of different point of view to hops?
We were really having a good time with Idaho 7 for a little bit. I wouldn't say that's an experimental hop, but like we really got on the bandwagon there. Lately, I feel like what we're using kind of lost some of the luster that we saw in it earlier, so we haven't actually been using much lately. But I think that hop's really, really cool. Get a lot of like white gummy bear pineapple from it.
Put a lot of dirt too. Is what we're getting down on it.
A lot of the HBC varieties that we mess with. 630. We just got in 692 for the first time and just released a beer with that. And I really, speaking of Sabro, that has some Sabro heritage, which you can kind of taste, but it's like the right amount of Sabro. It's pretty, restrained. But it's mostly like really kind of modern American citrus. So it's like maybe an updated Centennial or something. What other ones?
We played around with the HBC 344 quite a bit. That one's very different, and we actually started putting these into beers that were becoming like recurring batches, and it's like the thing that you want to avoid generally is putting these hard to get ingredients, but we just keep getting it as much as we can, and if we couldn't, again, it's the benefit of that 10-barrel argument we were talking about earlier. It's like, well, we got a little bit of it, one more batch, or if we don't, but we're a rotational brewery with no set schedule, so if we can't get more, then we'll move on to something else and see what else is cool. We definitely tinkered around with the South African hops for a while. When AB InBev got involved with that, in general, we just kind of went, we don't want to align with this.
Sure.
Those hops are cool, but they're definitely in the Sabro direction. And then right now, I think we're not running out of experimentation per se. I would actually say when we went with Jason Peralt on a tour of the experimental field in September, Citra and Mosaic are in the 300s. Now they're in like the 800s and the 900s, and there's some really cool hops that are probably 2 to 5 years away from coming into beers. But right now we're actually not buying that many new varieties. Strata has our heart. Strata is on the level with Citra, Mosaic, Simcoe to me, which, that's a big deal, I think, for any new hop to crack into that quality level. It does it all. It can be a great single hop. It's a great blender. It doesn't step on toes. It doesn't dominate or bully in a beer. That's kind of been... I know a lot of people are using that, so that's not as unique of an answer, but...
We have no tasting room right now, so everything's getting canned.
Right.
and experimentations at a minimum. And if it was a different world, we'd probably list 5 more hops for you, but that's not where we're at right now.
No, that's all right. And that raises that other question, beyond ingredients and beyond this, in a tasting room environment where people can come and, get some smaller pours of things and try and want, there's this inherent kind of exploratory philosophy and motivation psychology for a lot of craft beer drinkers that drives this, that the thing that brought people into craft beer was wanting to try new things and being excited about being able to try those new things. But this kind of COVID-19 era that we're in, since February, March, has just been a dramatic change to that. We've seen it even when we've polled readers asking about their buying habits, and it seems like people have gone from taking risks to not taking risks, both on the consumer side and on the brewer side. That, consumers trust breweries that they've already had trust in, and will continue to go with them on some things. But the ability for a brewery to say, hey, you should try this, and have people sample something, in a 3 or 4 ounce, spot or a taster in the tap room versus then having to buy a 4-pack of it. I mean, that's a giant gap in risk for a lot of consumers, and we're watching consumers kind of do the opposite and say they're going back. It's been the strangest dynamic to watch, to see like mainline core large national craft brands who had been hammered by this local and regional trend in craft beer that has taken a lot of the business, or been pretty successful through this, and we're watching like brands kick back up and sell because people are just familiar with those kinds of things. From your perspective as a brewer, how do you balance that kind of need to also keep learning yourselves and pushing yourselves to be creative and do things and try new things, with also this idea that you don't want to create something that your own customers are not necessarily going to want or take a flyer on with you. And then also, as a corollary to that, how do you continue to maintain that trust? Because again, when people can't sample something before they buy it, they have to believe that it's going to be good, and they have to have that kind of faith and trust in you that you're going to deliver this if they're not familiar with it.
The one way that we have experimented during this is a series of beers that kind of feeds all of those concerns that you just mentioned, and was designed before the pandemic. But we have a whole series. It's a really simple format. It's the word Mo to imply mosaic, and then enter the second hop here, and it's a 2-hop IPA. And we started with the stuff that made most sense. We do Mo Citra, Mo Galaxy, Mo Simcoe, Mo Nelson. But then with experimentals, the idea is that if a new experimental variety isn't that great, it's not strong enough, whatever it is, you still got 50% mosaic, and mosaic's awesome. So we've released in can. We did a Mo HBC 30 during the pandemic. That was a beer that had never been made before, brand new label. So there's definitely some consumer trust, but we are trying to still be a little bit of who we really are on the innovation front and put new stuff out. And right now we're doing mixed cases that you buy online. So it's a lot of beer. We just started doing half cases. But a beer like that, I think people got 8 cans of that out of 24. So you definitely need a little bit of trust in us, that we're not going to put a hop in there that you don't want. But that's kind of us trying to still be the tap room, innovators and do new stuff. So we did those 2 beers, and then we have a new brand coming out in like 2 weeks. It's a Nelson Citra Pale. I kind of looked at everything we make, and I'm like, I can't believe we haven't done this simple combo. Yeah. Kind of a guaranteed home run on the combo front, but it still is a new brand with a new name and yada yada. So, trying to keep it interesting, exciting, but definitely not as risky as we might be, knowing that a draft batch would just kind of get gobbled up in 2 or 3 weeks, and if it wasn't what we wanted, we would move on. It's, I don't want to say we're playing it safe, but I guess you kind of have to. Yeah. It's survival mode. People are relying on you for jobs and all that. So
we feel really fortunate that, we are a very small brewery. We don't have much reach as far as where our beer goes. We go down to San Diego for a tap takeover a couple of times a year, maybe LA once or twice a year, but that's it. It's just San Francisco and the immediate Bay Area. But when the pandemic hit and we started doing mail order beer, people from all over the state were ordering it. And that's been really amazing and somewhat overwhelming to a certain extent, how our small brewery has actually a much bigger name than I ever realized. And I think it goes back to what you were saying, where when finances get a little weird and you're tightening your belt and you don't know what the future holds, you're not going to take a big chance on some no-name brewery down the street who could be making great beer, but you want to buy the stuff that's going to make you happy, and you don't want to waste a cent buying something else. And it really showed that our reputation has, it traveled far and wide, and it's pretty exciting. And I feel very fortunate that people have heard such good things of us, or think such good things of us in general. It's been awesome.
All those times we just wanted to go drink beer with Bob at Highland Park and do a tap takeover actually turned into something. So
yeah,
thanks, Bob. Thanks, LA.
It is an interesting one, and that same spirit of experimentation, especially in the state of California, survives in that now out of market, people from Southern California, can now order your beer, and they can get their experimentation in with a brand that they're familiar with, but that they haven't had ready access to just because of this. So it's kind of an interesting and fascinating new world for selling beer. Looking off into the future, for Cellarmaker, for you all individually, what does success look like for you? Have you achieved it? Do you see it somewhere out there in the future? And how will you define it to know when you have achieved it?
I think Tim and I are both extremely proud of what we've done here at this location in San Francisco for 7 years. And I think in 2014, 2015, when CBC was in Denver that year, and we're seeing all these breweries that started out a little smaller than us or about the same size, and everyone in those years, there was sky's the limit, right? Grow big, grow huge. We're going to be 30 times bigger in 2 years than we are now. And it's just whoa. And we had seen breweries that we really loved out here go huge, and the quality didn't translate. And really, for us both being so committed to quality, we stayed small. And there's definitely a lot of times where it kind of felt like, why aren't we just blowing it up and going huge and getting a huge facility? And I think we're kind of ready to do something else as far as not massively increasing the capacity, but we're certainly looking to see what we can find that might be a second location like this in the East Bay that's this size, maybe 2 times, maybe 3 times. I don't really want to go bigger than that. We have control over all the beer right now. We have relationships with all the people who carry it on draft. I trust them to serve it fresh. All of our invoices say you have to keep this keg cold and tap it within 7 days of when you receive it. And people abide by that. And we're not just trying to be annoying or be disruptors. We just want the beer to taste really good when the customer gets it. And again, like I mentioned earlier, some customers are going to get that. They're going to go, I know this batch just came out because Instagram talked about it 6 days ago. Some people aren't going to know that. They're just going to go, the aroma on this is crazy compared to that distributed beer that went through 5 warehouses to get here. So we don't want to go huge. That's never been an interest. We like being small. We like keeping quality big. But now is also not the worst time to kind of be seeing what's on the market. So I definitely, my eyes are wide open and curious to see what I can find. So
as far as, expansion goes, for me personally, I've always felt like, I don't know, people have told us we've made good beer for a while, but I think only in the past year and a half, maybe 2 years, has our beer really got to a point that I'm extremely proud of, feel really good about it, and ready to take to more and more people. I don't know. I didn't ever want to be the brewery that made average beer and sell it and send it everywhere. Now that I think I'm I'm really doing some of the best stuff I've ever done, and at a very high level. I personally feel ready to, hand that pint glass over to someone who's a little further away. But then that gives you all different challenges of more freshness issues and shipping and wholesale or whatever means you're going to get that beer out there. And that's something we've always worried about. So we've got could be a rocky road after this, but we'll see.
Always new problems to solve. Yeah, for sure. Nearly 2,000 breweries across the U.S., Canada, and Mexico partner with G&D Chillers. Gambrinus Rye Malt gives spicy, grainy, and bready notes with suggestions of vanilla and sweet dough. Brewmation specializes in electric, steam, and direct fire brew houses. Spike is your source for premium home and nano systems. Abe is your trusted source for complete brewing and packaging solutions. And of course, Craft Beer and Brewing's all-access subscriptions are the best way to support this very podcast. Go to beerandbrewing.com, become a subscriber today, and you'll even get the new IPA issue when you do, featuring an article and recipe from Connor here of Cellarmaker. Thank you guys for joining me and talking to me on the podcast today. I appreciate it. If people want to learn more about Cellarmaker, where do they find you all?
Cellarmakerbrewing.com, Instagram, Cellarmaker Brewing, and thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Thank you.
Sure. Cheers.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.